I'd like to begin with asking this question: that how many of you can relate with this statement? All right, only few. Suddenly it happened with me, and I want to share that story with you. It was August, I guess 6th, 2012, almost a year back, 15 months back. I was in my office and I kind of walked out of my queue to meet Mitch. Mitch is Mitch is a tall guy, very influential in the executive role, and I wanted to show him a mobile app that we had developed. And basically I wanted to impress upon him that we were able to develop this app in less than 2 months using HTML5 and JQuery Mobile, which was kind of really very high in value and cost ratio. So he liked that. He liked it very much, and he asked. He just tested it on my iPhone 4S, and it was working fabulous, nice, very good. He asked me, "Can you install it on my iPhone 4?" I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So there was a doc build. I prepared the doc build and kind of I transferred it on his iPhone 4. He opened the app and tapped and tap. In that moment, I realized that this app, which I was so proud, was in front of him to get a pat on the back, is not responding to the touch, and also it is loading up late and also showing off flickerings. Next 5 months, I, along with my 2 developer team members, spend good amount of time looking into every aspect to kind of optimize the performance. And I think the mistake I made and my team made was that we adopted the website development approach, developing the HTML5 application. It is not that I didn't know that, but I was so eager and so curious to use HTML5 in my first app that kind of I ignored all those basic things probably we should consider when we are developing the HTML5 mobile app. So that's the whole overall premise of the presentation that I'm here to share with you. Thank you for trusting me with your time and energy. I'll try to make it worthwhile. By the way, I would like to share that the app I'm talking about has more than 7,000 users, and we get kind of 20,000 touch or click every month. And the best part is nobody is talking about or complaining about the performance. So let me do this. For those of you who are uninitiated on this topic, and I want to do a little activity, and basically we are going to kind of decompose the whole problem of writing HTML5 mobile app and take a fresh look at it, so that you can make a better decision and you don't have to do this 50%, 70% of this time for optimization. I need a little bit of help. If you can pass this thing to the person back to you, just to the back. It's just a toy from my daughter. Alright, probably I guess it took probably 5 seconds, and this is exactly the situation with the HTML5 mobile application development. There are different components, there are different fragments, there are different I should say the parts kind of which move from one layer to other layer to third layer. I think we all know that. We are talking about browser. Behind the browser we have DOM. which kind of render the HTML and kind of theme the whole HTML. We all know that, but I am here to emphasize and kind of underline that it is so much important for us to plan that, okay, if our flow is moving from one layer to other layer, let's say to the DOM, we need to plan it better. We need to measure it, and also we need to watch for it that, okay, it is performing well. And that was the mistake I made when first time I developed the app. I just kind of used HTML5 jQuery Mobile, and I hoped that it would work. And it did on iPhone 4S, but not on iPhone 3GS or kind of 4 or lower versions. So this was what we saw was kind of typical HTML5 mobile app development off the shelf. If you don't do anything, just put HTML5, some framework like JQuery Mobile or any other Sencha, then this is what is going to happen. Application is going to respond slow. So again, I am taking a very basic approach here, and I'm going to deep dive into what that website approach is if we kind of really don't take care of doing those things. So on the top is the elapsed time as it is passing with each of the steps. It is in 0 second, 0.5 second, which is 500 millisecond, and then 1 second, and so on. Assuming that a touch request is made and the request is placed, the first thing in typical mobile app is going to be that database is going to fetch and produce some data. And this is what I have tried to present here, that database is doing something, and let's assume that it takes 500 milliseconds, which is half second. It's going to pass it on to web server, IIS, ASP.NET or PHP, and the work of that web server is going to be to dress up that data into some HTML format. We're talking about LI or anything which is HTML that we want to present on the interface. So let's assume that step number 2 is that web server, IIS or ASP.NET, PHP is going to dress up that data into HTML format. Third step, I think, is network in between. There is a latency. That latency, because of that latency, the data is going to take some time to deliver it to browser. And again, this is a little bit of higher side. I'm not trying to make it up, but my intentions are just to make it a case by taking the worst case scenario, that what kind of latency we are looking at, what kind of situation we may face. So that's why this 1 second of latency is kind of a little bit on the higher side. And the next fourth step is browser is going to apply the theme or CSS on that HTML. If we are using jQuery Mobile, then that theme browser will try to implement. HTML5 is coming from server, but still browser is going to do some work to kind of further do the to polish it or use that theme. And it is very interesting that it does take time. We think that browser will be able to do it fast, but when we do profiling, we find that it's a significant amount of time that browser takes to apply that CSS. It is kind of sometime 200 millisecond, 100 millisecond, which is quite enough. And the third and the last part is the page transition. Page transition is kind of effect that we want to deliver to our end users so that they feel a seamless synergy between two pages, from one page to other page. So that transition does take time. If it is iPhone 3GS, then it's going to take more time. So this is the whole situation, and we are looking at 2 second or 2.5 second actually of the time for a mobile app which we just developed using the website approach. And this is something we should never do. My point here is to show it, just not to recommend it, but I'm just trying to present the problem that somebody who is uninitiated or new or very eager, like I was almost 15 months back, then you could end up in this situation. Just put together HTML5, JQuery Mobile, and it goes. But it is going to definitely create big problems. I'd like to take a pause and see if you have any comment or question at this level.
You mentioned profiling. Are you going to get into what profiling tools you use?
We're going to take a look at profiling. I think we're going to see that in the next few slides. I think I like to mention this, and I think it's related. In 1928, as a matter of fact, Mickey Mouse birthday was, I guess, yesterday. And I think I know all this because my daughter is 4 years old, and she started keeping track of all those things. But I was reading Walt Disney biography and came across this very interesting fact behind why those things on the top of Mickey always look rounded, whichever angle it is, even if it's kind of tilted this side or from front, or always those ears going to look just rounded in full shape. And the story was that in 1928, when Walt Disney lost his lawsuit, his first creation of kind of cartoon, he was very disappointed and kind of wanted to do something, and then he kind of imagined Mickey Mouse. The problem was he did not have resources that time. He had a lot of limitations. He did not have money. He had one artist, but with one artist you cannot produce the animation, because we are talking about the artwork, putting up one drawing and so many drawings and just doing that animation. Huge task. And the idea behind the round circle was that it is much less work to generate the animation, because you don't care, I mean, which direction it is. It is always going to look rounded. So the artists don't have to worry too much about giving a different kind of shape to those things on the top. And the same reason we see Mickey with the 4 fingers, because it is one less things to do the animation with. So this kind of, I think I found that story very interesting, and I think relevant here. Walt Disney knew that they have the limitation, and I think they found the creative solution of it. They acknowledged that there exists a problem, and they kind of tried to do some really creative approach to solve that problem. So probably we're going to take some inspiration from this story and see 4 specific techniques how we can really bring down that turnaround time which we saw from 2.5 second to 0.5 second. The first thing I think is very important, it is the profiling. And the whole reason I failed miserably in front of a higher up executive was that I didn't mind testing it on different devices, or kind of I just thought it's looking good on iPhone 4S. So the first suggestion is that I want to pass on here is Chrome developer tools are great. They want to show you a lot of details, like how much time the data is coming from server, a lot of other things, but do not trust them, because they're going to betray you when you are going to display to somebody. So take it, borrow an iPhone 3 or whatever the bottom OS version of OS that you will support. Borrow it, that device, and keep it with you. And every day, when you're doing something, just test it and see that it is acceptable or not. My experience is iPhone 3GS still a lot of people use. I think the app I'm talking about has still got 15% share, and it really is bad. iPhone 3GS with 6.0 is very bad. So that's one suggestion I just wanted to pass. So talking about profiling, I think we need to track each of these areas we talked about, from where the latency is coming. Basically, we talked about the database can produce the latency, and which is natural. We cannot kind of avoid it, but at least we'd like to watch how much delay it coming from database, how much time it is taking. So that's the database. We can watch and then try to see how much time web server is taking to render. The browser part, especially the theming and page transition. So let me show you an app. By the way, I cannot show you the app which I talked about. It is a B2B app, and I'm abide by the NDA. But I'm going to show you a different app that I've created for this demo. So assuming, okay, I'll have to view at one place. So assuming that this application is in beta, I think usually the best approach is to have two gates to enter, one for kind of developer like people like us, and other for kind of beta user. And so assuming that we want to see those messages coming, like how much time that particular transition from one page to other page took. So I'm going to enter using with profiling. So here we are seeing something, and I'll get to that point that how we are seeing that. But first is the touch response time. The touch response is, I think probably most of us already know that the mobile browser. Okay, so this is going to take probably 2 minutes.
What are you using to display the icon on the screen?
That's a kind of a software called Reflector. Reflector? Yeah. So it's just kind of, you just need to install it on your PC or Mac, and you can mirror your iPhone or iPad right there.
Without actually connecting it to the device?
No, yeah, this just, it has to be on the same Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think it's better than the the Apple TV.
Yeah.
It's just kind of $10 or something. guess we are back to where we got ended. Okay, so with profiling, we are seeing some data here. So the first is the touch response, which is showing up right now, like 271 millisecond. I'm sorry. So this time, usually browser wait for some time before it responds to the touch, and that delays, we all know, I guess now, that usually that is 300 millisecond, and there are various techniques we can kind of reduce that, suppress that delay and kind of make it work faster, like fast click, or Google has also got its own API. So, but still it's a good idea to kind of watch how much touch response time is coming. So that's the first thing. Second is the transition from one screen to other screen. Third is the data fetch time, which is very, very frugal right now, which is 2 milliseconds. And third is rendering and thinning part. Thanks to iPhone 4S, I think it's 16 milliseconds, which is very good and decent. And also the screen is simple. So that's the kind of few things I'm trying to track, and there are a few options to do the profiling. There are a few tools, but basically I couldn't find any one tool meeting all those requirements. So basically I ended up writing my own code, and I think it's not that difficult. All we have to do is, in the first event, we have to set a date object. As soon as the event ends, we have to set another date object, instantiate it, and just do the kind of minus set. And that's going to give us that, okay, between the 2 points, what kind of time was taken. So let me show you that. This is a Visual Studio editor, and so just to assist debugging and profiling, this is a separate object debug, and here let me open that. So here are very simple functions. The touch response began, and we're doing nothing but just instantiating the object, and on touch response end we're just kind of creating another, and we are logging that the difference. All we have to do is call these functions from the right places. So for example, let me show you, in case of we are making the AJAX request or data request from where it is being called. So this is one function in the whole in the framework, which kind of does the job of fetching the data from server, and here should be one call for that profiler, should be somewhere here. Okay, I think I omitted that or something, but basically if you have to do the profiling, we can add it here, and once the call is over, we can call another function, and that way the difference or the time taken for that request will be logged, and we can kind of display it, present it. So that was simple approach adopted in that, and I think that worked pretty well in my case. Since we are here, I would like to share one thing. I think one common problem with when you are you have so many JavaScript files that you don't get the intelligence. You really want to see that, okay, I created another object in somewhere else in a different JavaScript file. How I can kind of find out or easily type the member method and properties of that. So I think Visual Studio has done it nicely, that these are the references you can define, and so basically I can call any object and get the properties here. I really found this very easy and usable. So that was about profiling. Assuming that the profiling part is done and our application is able to capture now all the delays and the latencies, and so the next technique, or I would say the best recommended approach is we turn our application from thick server to thin server. It simply means, or we can say in other words, single page application. So instead of asking ASP.NET to do the dress up and generate the HTML, we will rather use browser to produce the HTML. So the job of the server, web server, is going to be only to produce the data. It's going to be just an API server for us, and that exactly is the kind of idea here. We don't want to get big data, a lot of data, well formatted, dressed up data from server. We don't want to do that, and we want to just get the data in JSON format or XML format and then get it on the client. And if you want to store it, use it and store it in the local storage. That's another benefit. When we are getting this data, we are getting so much control. We can store it in the local storage or in our database and local browser database and use it later. So SPA, I think, is the best approach to kind of further improve the performance. And here is how. So you'll see that instead of following a linear path of going one step at a time, we can actually begin the page transition as soon as user perform the touch event or click or hit something. So instead of waiting for everything to finish and doing the page transition, we are talking about, okay, database request is placed and we'll also transition user to the next page. The web server is going to perform nothing here. It's just, as we talked about it, that it's going to be, if you follow this approach of thin server, then web server is just going to be a more API provider or data provider. The data again is going to pass from the network, but this time the size of the data is going to be much less, because it's just JSON data. It's not HTML data with all the styling and all the details. There is no payload. It's just data, real data. So data, of course, is going to pass quickly, and the browser job is now to translate that data into HTML. So therefore, now let's say that browser is going to translate the data, taking 500 milliseconds, and theming part, same thing. And so this approach basically going to give us 30% better performance from the previous first website development approach which we saw. Again, these numbers, don't hold me on these numbers. These are very abstract, but the idea here is just to present the problem. Third is the caching part. I want to show you one thing here. data fetch time is 700 millisecond approx, but if we go to another page, let's say this is the page from where user can, this is all the cities, and user with this page, user will be able to add a city so that he can or she can watch the temperature of that city. Now, I think this data is not going to change. So the idea here is, can we cache it? Because if we don't cache it, probably this is going to take 700 or 800 milliseconds. So idea here is, let's cache it, and we are talking about caching not only on browser, on local storage, but we're talking about also performing caching on the server. ASP.NET or any other modern server technology will allow us to kind of define the caching profile. We can define like for how many hours we want the caching and all of those details. So basically, following with this caching approach, we will be able to reduce our time to much significant level. Right now, the data fetch time is showing up 0 because the data is coming from the local storage of the browser. And this is much faster. Let's say I turn off the caching, then let's see how it happens. Right now, the total time is 426 milliseconds. This is a custom object, and in that object I have defined a property is cacheable, and I want to really control that behavior through the properties and not really kind of just to keep it tight and centralized. So I'm just defining that we do not want to cache the data. And here is the same page, and the data fetch time is showing 245 milliseconds, which was kind of 0 seconds earlier. So basically, you may like to sometime use the data from the cache. Sometime you may like to kind of fetch it fresh, and that's why if you have a property, you will be able to control that behavior. Okay, for this time, let's fetch it from the local storage. But if you really want to kind of fetch it fresh, you'll be able to define and say, okay, I want fresh data. So you'll be able to turn it off, say false, and then the data will come. So the object model that you have defined in your framework will allow you to kind of use it in situations. So that was about caching. So in scenarios when we are able to implement the caching, our time will reduce really to a very good level, which we are talking about almost under a second, which is very good. When the page is turning up under a second, that we can consider that as a good performance. The last technique is the UI design. Let me show it to you what I'm talking about. You will notice that on the touch, we are giving enough clue to our users. We are not simply waiting for the data to load and then do the transition. We are as soon as user is touching or clicking, or we are taking and we are giving some clue. That, like for example, if when we touch, something is happening that which is glowing. And thanks to CSS, we can easily do that in like 3 or 5 lines of code. We can make our button glow so that at least user is clear that okay, that the touch is acknowledged and device is going to do something. So that is one thing, so that we can make our users feel that application is really responsive and behaving, performing fast. Second approach to UI designing is, let's not render everything. Coming here to this page, we can wait and not render the second tab, which is hourly tab here, because we don't know if user is really going to come and click on that hourly tab. And there is a cost of rendering. We saw that browser is going to take the data, format it in HTML, and then CSS theming is going to apply there. So sometimes you can take that decision that okay, can we avoid the rendering, can we cut it down and just get the data and wait for the right kind of clue from the user, so and then do it in that particular time. So that's kind of progressive elaboration or rendering that we are just kind of doing on demand rather than doing it all once.
But the data's already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Data is already there because we really don't want to make user feel that so much is happening. But there is a trick. Let's say that at this point, when this screen is showing up, data is not there. What we're going to do is we're going to pull the data asynchronous from background. As soon as the page shows up, we make a request to server to fetch the data for all remaining 4 tabs. And there is no cost of it because we are talking about asynchronous JavaScript call, AJAX call. And we are just kind of outsourcing or kind of offboarding, just passing the request to somewhere else. So that is not going to make our application look slower in any way. So the trick here is show something, and as soon as it is displayed, make another request for another set of data that you feel user can click next. So I place a request for hourly data, and then as soon as, so data is now ready, and if user clicks it, we're going to render it. There is one thing that I like to kind of bring in here, that set timeout will do the trick most of the time. As soon as page loads, we set timeout for 50 milliseconds or like 100 milliseconds, place another request for the data. We can do that. But set timeout is not a parallel thing in JavaScript world. JavaScript is single threaded. And if we are setting up set timeout, it's non-blocking, but it is not parallel. It is going to take and wait and going to execute in the single thread. So we need to be careful. We cannot put up so many set timeout and assume that it's not parallel application. So set timeout does come with a cost, and that we need to watch for it. However, I think if you have a kind of situation where you want to really do a lot of data manipulation, I think the best thing we have in HTML5 is the worker process. You can offload the work that really you want to execute in parallel, a true parallel way, then the worker process can take it up. The only limitation with the web worker is it cannot access DOM. So basically you'll have to set up the proxy or the API, the message, so that your DOM and worker process can talk to each other. I think that was about UI. I tried to cover only few basic concepts that I felt are really important when we are developing the mobile app. And I think in conclusion, it is very important for us to watch for the performance of our app from day one and use the real devices and just see the performance, and we can evolve and kind of keep improving on the performance. Last thing that is my experience is, instead of just putting things there, the best approach would be that we develop that as a component. Because performance optimization, believe it or not, is going to be a regular activity. You cannot just do it in the first 3 months or 1 month and then hope that it will just work, because there are new devices coming up. There's going to be some different situation. You're going to see that DOM is breaking. It's going to consume more. It's consuming more memory and it's performing slow. So when you are developing that as component, your UI as component, basically you are gaining that capability of keep on improving it. For example, this pop-up here. This pop-up here is, we could have rendered it just putting up some jQuery or Sencha or something, but instead of doing that, my experience is if we package it as a component, we get much more flexibility. Number one, tomorrow you can change your framework. Let's say that we start realizing that jQuery Mobile is not kind of growing, we can switch it, because basically we are talking about a thin layer between our code and the framework. The second thing is, we can optimize it for different devices very easily when it is a component, rather than coming purely from the JavaScript library. So I think component development is really very important in case of HTML5 mobile development, because it is going to allow you the opportunity to keep on improving and optimizing. I guess that was it. I had I think pretty much done. From if you guys have any question or if you have any comment.
I have a few questions. What SPA framework did you use?
The framework?
Yes.
That's a jQuery Mobile for theming and Backbone for the templating.
Backbone.
Yeah, and I have an interesting story. So I started I started just kind of putting things together. Then I realized I need a framework to organize code. Then I tried Knockout. Then Angular came, and I really got fascinated, and I tried it. But the problem with Angular was that it was doing so many things behind the scene, that firing so many events that I did not have any control on. And the application started kind of looking very slow, because there were multiple events going on. Without my knowledge, so many things were happening. Angular is really powerful, but kind of it does so many things that you really do not do. So I came down to Backbone finally, which is very light, but it is allowing me to do whatever I want.
Okay, and for caching, you said you created like properties on each of the variables or whatever you're using. You put properties.
Yeah.
So what happens when you are using, like, there are two different users and trying to get the same property? What happens at that time? How is the caching handled at that time?
That's mostly read only, so we are not really worried about it.
Okay.
We really don't care. Right? I mean, it's not writable.
So if you, like you had for everything for Illinois, so if somebody changed the state, so how will that work? Then it's not, you're changing some variable there, so how does the caching work there? Does it fetch again the whole thing, or how does it work on that variable?
Just to understand your question correctly, is it like how you invalidate the caching?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are two things. The first is we can define the caching profile that in every 12 hours we want to clear out data on the server. And the second approach is we don't want to wait for 12 hours. Then the best, the approach that I found good was, for every app there was a WebKit ID. And let's say that currently the WebKit ID is 1.1, and it will keep pinging server in every an hour or so if it is running, to check if there is a new version available. And we can define the WebKit ID like, let's say 1.1.1. So the last part of that WebKit is for data. So if the mobile app found that there is a new version 1.1.2, which means this app is supposed to take the latest data from the server and not use the local cache. So by kind of implementing the WebKit version ID and defining that, okay, the last part is for the data, we can really kind of control that, okay, when do we really want to get the data from the server. Did I answer your question?
Yes, but I was thinking more in the realm of like bigger things, and we were having trouble with caching. So it was when we had two browsers or two different computers we were using to get to our app. It was showing us the same, because we're caching some of the data which was coming through. So it would show us for that second user also the same data in the beginning, and then it will take some time to actually load it and get the data. So we were having some trouble. That's why I was wondering what kind of methodology you use to get around it.
Yeah, but I guess
Yours is more static data and
Yeah.
more fixed is different. For us, it was changing based on the user and what screen they were pulling up to.
very stateful data.
Yeah, so that's why we had a little bit trouble with that.
Okay.
So I have a question. It's catered more towards the UX UI design aspect of mobile. And as a personal experience as well as at work, user experience evolves when you're going from desktop to phone. It's like looking through a periscope. And even with Amazon, as well as they've designed their sites and their native apps, I always find myself being frustrated with not being able to get the same content delivery into my application on my phone or my iPad. So I typically always make a purchase on the desktop, and I'll leave the living room and go make a purchase. And in my company, currently, 15% of our sales comes from phone devices. And that's a lot, but it's not groundbreaking, right? So if anyone has any ideas, how do you get the information onto something that's only 4 inches wide to someone? It's just frustrating. I've never bought from my phone before.
I think I've been through the same pain because I came from the same website development, and we are used to kind of put together things, and I think the key difference is the user is going to have single point of focus on iPhone. On desktop, there's going to be multiple point of focus. So the idea was to kind of, and I think I didn't learn it. I think it came from experience 3-4 application development. And the big motivation was that we can never get rid of the latency in mobile app. There is always going to be some delay. So the big motivation was, if we really have to make it impressive, we'll have to deliver the kind of UI so that user forget about the pain of that delay, which kind of took him like 500 milliseconds. So that was big motivation. I really wanted to make a point that HTML5 is the thing. So I kind of started focusing more on UI and try to learn from different app and just break it down into small and give one piece of information which was more important, and kind of render the beacons or kind of small buttons so that user can kind of navigate to it. But it came from like, it took me kind of 10-15 months really to kind of do a better design work.
I have one more question. So the Visual Studio, you showed that you could do IntelliSense.
Yeah.
And which version of Visual Studio are you using?
That should be to 2010.
2010 and
2010. Yeah.
20, and I mean, what did you have to add something to?
No, nothing. Just kind of standard feature. You just have to add the files.
So will it work with like Durandal and Knockout? And
Yeah,
stuff?
it just it's going to work. It's just JavaScript file for Visual Studio.
So if I just use that framework files and required path, a reference path, how does it work with required liaisons? Will it still be the same?
Yeah, it is.
So I have to just use those reference path stuff.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
That will be
As far as performance goes, what did you not like about Knockout? I mean, other than I know it's two-way binding and has a lot of things, but Backbone you have to build a lot of that stuff yourself.
Yeah,
So you have to use Marionette on top of it or do something else. I mean, I can understand why Angular is bad. It's all interpreted HTML, right? I mean, you're just pushing something off onto some other engine.
Yeah, it's
That's
some black
already
magic.
to VM, yeah. But and not saying that Knockout doesn't have that same kind of stuff, but a lot of people have tried to use Backbone and they find out that, well, we want to use Backbone because it's lightweight, it's amazing, it has routing,
But first thing is I was worried about the kind of marriage between JQuery Mobile and the knockout. I was not pretty sure that how it's going to work out, namespace collections and all those things. And on the top of the extra payload, Backbone comes with this lightweight thing, and it has got so powerful kind of functions to manipulate your JSON, and you can do so many things, sorting, merging, and kind of literally query your data. And I had to use the Backbone, even if I would use knockout. So, and I wanted to gain more control, kind of how I'm rendering the data, and therefore kind of I went with the Backbone. So it is not necessarily the wrong thing with the knockout. It was the Backbone, but I felt more in that.
So it wasn't slow.
Knockout.
That's what I was trying to get at. How was the performance? Did you actually implement it?
Honestly, I think I did spend some time. I found it a little slow, but I really did not stick and try to improve it as such. So I just moved on.
Right.
Yeah, I would just comment too that it probably depends what you're doing in those frameworks. I've got an Angular app that's responsive; it works fine on the mobile devices.
Yeah.
It's a pretty lightweight Angular app. It doesn't use like heavy UI components. It does a lot of just simple empty repeats and stuff.
Yeah.
So it probably depends quite a bit. And, another app that's using like Tender UI, it basically sucks on the tablet, right? It barely works on a tablet, right? It's pretty heavy. So it probably just depends a lot on your particular app.
And exactly, I think Angular has so much power in it, and you like to understand everything, because if you don't, then probably it's just going to kind of come out from somewhere. And I probably did not have that energy that I am trying to design a jQuery Mobile, and then at the same time I try to understand another vast framework as Angular, and I kind of lose focus from my original goal. So that's kind of. But I would like to understand, because I had a very bad experience with the ng repeat. It was kind of binding my data 4 or 5 times. I don't know why, kind of multiple times. So I was thinking, why it is binding every time? The rendering that I showed you was coming up like 10 times in that profiling. I said,
Yes.
it's enough.
Something's wrong there.
Thank you so much, I guess, for your time.